Welcome to week 2 of our online book club series to discuss Hattie Fisher and Frey's new book, The Distance Learning Playbook. Asynchronous chat will take place in our Facebook group, Reinventing Education Post-Pandemic. You can search for the group or find it on my page, Jane Natalie Coaching. Today we are talking about Module 6, Engaging Tasks. This is what I consider the meat and potatoes. No one likes to be bored. The authors repeatedly remind us that boredom has a negative effect size of negative 0.47. But they do describe 3 types of engagement. The behavioral engagement is what we typically consider in terms of participation in completing assignments. Cognitive engagement is the psychological effort students put into their learning and their ability to self-regulate. And emotional engagement is their interest in the learning, the relationships they build, and the sense of belonging in the class. So we need to capitalize on all 3. The authors go on to describe a continuum of engagement from disengaged to engaged with a twist. There is active participation on both ends of the spectrum, with passive in the middle. Students who are disengaged sometimes actively disrupt others in the learning. Sometimes they are withdrawn passively. Students who are engaged sometimes do so passively, completing the work and doing what they're asked. However, actively engaged students are in the driver's seat of their learning, setting goals, seeking feedback, and self-assessing their learning. So how are we trying to move students along that continuum? In engaging students, especially in a hybrid and distance learning, we find that we have technology tools as far as we can see, but the abundance of tools isn't particularly useful. The authors caution us not to get caught up in the tools themselves, but the function that they serve. What are the basic functions of learning students need to engage? Summarizing it, students need to engage in finding, using, creating, and sharing information. There are tools to assist us to have our students engage with these functions, but the authors advise to select the tools that meet the need of your intended function for engagement, as well as considering if it's a tool your students can use without too much adult help, and does it support any accommodations your students may need, like text-to-speech. Finally, the authors suggest making sure you introduce and teach the tools slowly so you don't overwhelm yourself or your students with too many new tools at once. As always, success still comes down to designing the actual tasks the students will complete. Too many times, online work ends up leaning more toward the side of busy work instead of learning. The authors suggest the following considerations when designing tasks. Open versus closed tasks. Pose problems to students that they can solve in multiple ways. Create connections. Ask students to compare and contrast, identify rules or patterns, and map relationships. Ask students to think for themselves before you give them the answers. And shift from procedures to problem solving. Build reliance on each other as learners during the problem-solving exercises by strategically leaving out or including some irrelevant information. The chapter ended with us asking to think about what we ask students to do in synchronous versus asynchronous settings. They recommend prioritizing making connections, discussion, and interacting with each other during live sessions, and saving reading short videos and writing tasks that build on prior knowledge for asynchronous settings. Whatever routines you decide on, be consistent and build a flow for the week that is realistic for students and families' schedules and overall workload. These are our questions for discussion. How are you structuring your asynchronous versus synchronous time with your students? And what tools are you finding useful for the functions of engagement you need in your classroom? Join us online or live on Zoom on Thursday at 7 p.m.